Hi there, John McAdams here. Thanks a lot for joining me in this video where I talk about the 6.5 PRC and how it matches up against its bigger brother, the 7mm precision rifle cartridge. Now I have both. I have shot both extensively at the range and I have hunted a lot with both as well. Now while the 6.5 and 7 PRC cartridges are closely related and have a large amount of overlap in their best use cases, I think each one is best suited for different situations and they have different strengths and weaknesses. So in this video, I discuss the overall design characteristics and performance specs of each round, then I compare how they stack up next to each other. I also cover how they each perform in some ballistic gel tests. And yes, I am aware of the velocity issues with the 7mm PRC right now. Those shortcomings do inform my analysis in this episode. I have also taken game with both cartridges, and as a matter of fact, I have used about half of the currently available 7mm PRC factory loads afield. I share details on how those cartridges performed with those different bullets afield on different animals in this episode as well. So let's get started. I'll talk about the history and design characteristics of these two rounds briefly. Now, the 6.5 PRC came along first when George Garner, owner of GA Precision, decided to create what he considered an ideal cartridge for use by PRS, or Precision Rifle Series competition shooters. In PRS matches, shooters cannot use bullets larger than .308 caliber or with a velocity higher than 3,200 feet per second. George wanted a round that fit within those limitations, that was flat shooting, performed well in the wind, and didn't have too much recoil to facilitate spotting impacts. Furthermore, he also wanted a short-action cartridge. Now, 6mm cartridges are very popular at PRS competitions right now, but back in 2012, 2013, when he was doing this, there weren't as many positional stages in PRS competitions, and more shooting was done from the prone, so George ended up going with a 6.5mm bullet. George had this to say about why he went with a 6.5 in an interview with Outdoor Life. Quote, "I wanted the highest BC bullet you could push at 3,200 in a short action. The 6s could be pushed that fast, but they have lower BCs. The 7mm have higher BCs, but can't be pushed at 3,200 in a short action. The lack of bullet selection in the 25 and 270 calibers ruled those out, so that's why I settled on the 6.5. End of quote. He also wanted a quote-unquote Goldilocks case with just the right amount of powder. Not too little, not too much to reach his desired performance levels, and he also ideally wanted a case without a rebated rim and without a belt. He initially wanted to use the Ruger Compact Magnum case, which is itself based on the 375 Ruger, as a parent case for this new cartridge he was developing. Due to difficulties associated with obtaining RCM cases during the ongoing panic buying-induced ammo shortage at the time, Garner settled on the Remington Short Action Ultra Magnum as a parent case, and he created what was essentially a 6.5 SAUM. It worked pretty well for his purposes, but he was not 100% satisfied with it since it had a rebated rim. Fortunately, things did eventually calm down with ammo panic buying, and Hornady was able to turn their attention to what would become the 6.5 PRC and help him redesign the cartridge using a 300 Ruger Compact Magnum case like Garner originally wanted. Hornady formally rolled out the new 6.5 precision rifle cartridge in 2018 and standardized it with SAMI. Typical 6.5 PRC ballistics with factory ammunition are a 143 grain bullet at 2,960 feet per second or a 147 grain bullet at 2,910 feet per second. Both of these loads are designed to minimize bullet drop and wind drift at extended range. 6.5 PRC factory loads generally fire the same bullet approximately 2 to 250 feet per second faster than the 6.5 Creedmoor. Plus, they also incorporated many of the so-called modern cartridge design principles Outdoor Life shooting editor John Snow and I discussed in a recent interview, episode 366 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast, to check it out, and they did that to improve the overall accuracy potential of their new cartridge. And yes, with careful hand loading, it is possible to come very close to that 3,200 foot per second goal Garner had when he first designed the cartridge. For instance, some Hornady hand loads lists velocities of 3,100 and 3,150 for the 6.5 PRC with that 143 grain ELDX. Okay, now let's talk about the 7mm precision rifle cartridge. Now, the 6.5 PRC is a short action cartridge, and Hornady also unveiled a Magnum length 300 PRC around the same time they brought the 6.5 PRC to the market. So it was only natural that the folks at Hornady would build a standard length 7mm member of the family to fit squarely in the middle, and that's what they did in late 2022 when they announced the 7mm precision rifle cartridge. Now, the folks at Hornady built the 7PRC using also a modified 375 Ruger cartridge case. Now, I said the 6.5 PRC parent case is the 300 Ruger Compact Magnum. That is true, but the 300 RCM is descended from the 375 Ruger too, so they're all still in the same family. Now, the 375 Ruger has the same .532-inch case head diameter as the 375 H&H, but unlike the 375 H&H, the 375 Ruger is a beltless cartridge with minimal taper, so the actual body of the 375 Ruger case is larger in diameter than the 375 H&H. Now, Hornady designed the 7PRC to fire heavier bullets with an insanely high ballistic coefficient right at 3,000 feet per second. The result is a cartridge that is extremely efficient, generally isn't too difficult to tune for accuracy, that uses very high BC bullets that hang on to velocity and buck the wind surprisingly well as they travel downrange. Typical advertised loads for the 7PRC fire a high BC lead core 175 grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second or a 160 grain copper bullet at that same velocity. Yes, I know there's some controversy regarding those figures. I'll discuss that in more detail shortly. Now let's talk about cartridge sizes. Now, these two cartridges share a lot of the same characteristics, but the 7mm PRC is bigger. I'll talk about the similarities first, then go into their differences. Both are beltless Magnum cartridges descended from the 375 Ruger. Both rounds have a fatter case that requires a Magnum bolt face. Both rounds are built with a lot of head height, which means they have more room outside the case to accommodate really long, sleek, high BC bullets without intruding into the powder column while still staying within SAMI specs. Both have a 30-degree shoulder. Both have a maximum SAMI average pressure of 65,000 psi. Both also have a 1 8-inch twist rate. But like I said, the 7PRC is bigger. Max overall length of the 6.5 PRC is 2.955 inches. The 7PRC is longer overall at 3.34 inches. The 6.5 PRC is a short-action cartridge. The larger 7mm PRC requires a longer 30-06 length action. Now, the 7PRC is not only longer overall, but it has a longer case that can hold more powder. I measured the average case capacity of 5 pieces of fired Hornady brass for each cartridge. 6.5 PRC case capacity came out to 69 grains of water. 7PRC case capacity came out to 80.8 grains of water. That's about a 17% difference. That will vary depending on who manufactures the brass, but you get the idea. The 6.5 PRC uses .264 caliber bullets, while the 7mm PRC uses larger .284 caliber bullets. Both cartridges are designed to use long, heavy for caliber, high BC bullets, but there is a big difference in common bullet weights for each because they use that different bore diameter. Now, while the 6.5 PRC most often uses bullets in the 120 to 147 grain range, in particular, it uses high BC 120 to 130 grain monometal and 140, 143, and 147 grain lead core bullets. The heaviest bullet I am aware of in a factory load for the 6.5 PRC is the 156 grain Berger Elite Hunter. The 7mm PRC most often uses bullets in the 150 to 180 grain range. That cartridge was specifically designed from the start to use high BC 160 grain monometal and 175 grain and 180 grain lead core bullets. Copper Creek makes a factory load with a 195 grain Berger Elite Hunter. That's the heaviest hunting bullet I am aware of for the cartridge right now. It is important to note that while both cartridges use relatively high BC bullets for their bore diameter, the 7mm PRC tends to use higher BC projectiles than the 6.5 PRC. More on this in a minute. All right, now let's talk about the relative ballistics of these two cartridges. The 7mm PRC has a significantly larger case and can push a heavier and higher BC bullet at an almost identical velocity that the 6.5 PRC can push a lighter and lower BC bullet. Now, this is a good point to acknowledge and briefly discuss the fact that the 7mm PRC often falls short of advertised velocities. I was one of the first people to publicly investigate this in 2024, and I made a specific episode where I discussed this in detail. Link is in the episode description. Check it out to hear all the details. Long story short, though, most but not all 7mm PRC factory ammo right now is often falling 100 to 200 feet per second short of advertised velocities. I have shot a bunch of factory loads for both cartridges. I have found 2 7mm PRC loads in current production in 2025 that come very close to hitting their advertised velocities. Everything else is falling short. On the other hand, virtually every 6.5 PRC factory load I have shot has performed very close to advertised. So in this comparison, I will use a couple of 6.5 PRC factory loads with their advertised muzzle velocities, and I will compare those to both advertised 7mm PRC data and some real-world 7mm PRC muzzle velocities I have obtained out of my rifle with a 22-inch long barrel using Hornady and Barnes factory loads of 2,862 feet per second with 175 grain ELDX and 2,931 feet per second with a 160 grain Barnes LRX. And yes, I will be providing 7PRC ballistic data with advertised velocities as well. Hornady is not achieving that velocity as I record this, but as you will learn if you check out the episode where I investigate this in more detail, Federal offers a factory load with that exact 175 grain ELDX bullet that actually achieves that velocity out of a 24-inch long barrel, or it comes very close to it with a 22-inch long barrel. I've seen it with my own eyes. So that's why I'm including 2 sets of ballistic data for the 7mm PRC in this comparison, a fast load and a slow load. So I'll compare the 175 ELDX and 160 LRX loads for the 7PRC to Hornady and Barnes loads for the 6.5 PRC, shooting 127 grain LRX, 0.468 BC, and 143 grain ELDX, 0.625 BC. The 160 LRX has a 0.608 BC, 175 grain ELDX has a 0.689 BC. So first, the 7PRC fires a higher BC bullet at a velocity about as fast as the 6.5 PRC, but that does depend on whether or not we're talking about the slow or the fast 7PRC loads here, though. That translates into better performance in the wind, more retained energy, and depending on the details, a slightly flatter trajectory. But that said, all 6 loads have very similar trajectories out to 400 yards. Now, the ELDX loads all do great, but you do start to see a divergence in performance with the fast versus slow 7PRC loads out at around 400 yards. It does get worse as the range increases. Now, the 7PRC is quite a bit more powerful and deflects less in the wind than comparable 6.5 PRC loads, but the gap is smaller with the slower 7PRC load. If we set 1,800 feet per second as an absolute minimum desired impact velocity for bullet expansion, the 6.5 Barnes load hits that threshold at 670 yards, the 6.5 Hornady load hits it at 865 yards, and the slow and fast 7PRC Barnes loads hit that at 820 and 900 yards respectively. The slow and fast 7PRC Hornady loads hit that threshold at 880 and 980 yards respectively. So the 7PRC does have a slightly longer theoretical effective range than the 6.5 PRC for hunting anyway. We're talking about bullet expansion here. But all of those ranges are much farther downrange than what most people have any business shooting. Even 670 yards is a really long poke. Now at 500 yards, the fast 7mm PRC ELDX load has about 33% more energy than the corresponding 6.5 PRC load. The slow 7PRC ELDX load has about 20% more retained energy. When we compare the Barnes loads, the fast 7PRC has about 56% more retained energy and about 42% more for the slow 7PRC load. Since the 6.5 Barnes load falls below 1,800 feet per second by 670 yards, I'll compare the 2 Barnes loads at 600 yards. So the fast 160 LRX has 62% more retained energy at that range. That drops to a 48% advantage with the slow 160 LRX. Now, both 7PRC loads are a little flatter shooting than the 6.5 PRC here, too. If we extend the range to 800 yards, the fast 175 ELDX has about 39% more retained energy. That drops to a 24% advantage with the slow 175 ELDX. Trajectories are very similar with these cartridges. Both of the fast 7PRC loads have either a small advantage or are nearly the same as the 6.5 ELDX load. That flips to a small advantage for the 6.5 PRC with the slow 7PRC loads. Not a significant difference either way, though. Now, the 7PRC does have the edge over the 6.5 PRC with the wind, even with the slower loads, but the 6.5 does really well here. At 500 yards, the two fast 7PRC loads have a significant edge over the 6.5 PRC, 14% for the ELDX load and 38% for the LRX. If we compare the slow 7PRC loads, that advantage shrinks to about 6% for the ELDX and about 31% for the LRX. At 600 yards, the 6.5 Barnes load has about 39% more wind deflection than the fast 7PRC Barnes load, and about 32% more than the slow 7PRC Barnes load. Now, funny enough, that fast 7PRC Barnes load has nearly the same wind deflection at 700 yards as the 6.5 Barnes load does at 600 yards. That is a substantial difference. The 6.5 PRC does substantially better shooting that ELDX bullet here, though. The 7PRC does still have about a 15% advantage with the fast load and about a 7% advantage with the slow load at 800 yards. Now, a hunter or shooter looking for that little bit of an advantage in wind deflection would be well served to look at that 175 grain ELDX load for the 7PRC. And the 7PRC does great with that federal ammo that actually achieves close to the advertised velocity. Less than a foot of wind deflection at 500 yards with a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind is outstanding. That's what you get with the fast 175. So the big takeaways so far are those relatively higher BC bullets do offset the advantages of the slower 7PRC loads, but the cartridge definitely takes a hit in performance relative to the 6.5 PRC, though it is still more powerful. The little 6.5 PRC hangs tough here, though, and it performs well, especially in the wind. And also, there's not a gigantic difference in performance between any of these loads inside 400 yards either. But it is worth noting the 7PRC has a marked advantage with copper bullets. Keep that in mind if you are required to use copper bullets or if you just prefer to use them. Now let's talk about how these rounds perform in ballistic gel and on game. I'll compare three identical factory loads for each here: the Hornady Precision Hunter, Barnes Vortex Long Range, and Federal Terminal Ascent. First, we'll talk about the Hornady Precision Hunter. The 143 grain ELDX for the 6.5 PRC makes a very wide wound cavity and delivers decent penetration. Funny enough, the 175 grain ELDX from the 7PRC does not perform too differently. Almost identical penetration combined with a wound cavity just a little bit bigger. The 175 had a little bit more expansion and a little less weight retention, but overall, very, very similar performance here. And before you ask, I conducted this test in 2023 with one of the original Hornady factory loads for this cartridge that was actually achieving very close to advertised velocity. Now, things were different with the Federal Terminal Ascent ammo, though. Now, the 130 grain Terminal Ascent for the 6.5 penetrated well, a couple more inches of penetration than the 143 grain ELDX, and it made a medium to large-sized wound cavity, but the wound was not as big as the cartridge made with the 143 grain ELDX. Now, the 170 Terminal Ascent for the 7PRC penetrated several inches deeper than even the 6.5 Terminal Ascent load, and it made a noticeably larger wound than the 130 Terminal Ascent. And funny enough, the 170 Terminal Ascent actually made a slightly larger wound than the 175 grain ELDX. The Terminal Ascent bullets in general did not produce as much fragmentation as the ELDX bullets either. Now, the Barnes bullets produced the most narrow wounds, but both the 127 and 160 grain LRX bullets delivered fantastic penetration. The best out of anything I tested here. Over 33 inches for the 127 grain LRX and just under 32 for the 160 grain LRX. Though the Barnes bullets did not make as wide of a wound cavity as the Terminal Ascent or ELDX bullets, I wouldn't say they produced small wounds either, and in both cases, they made very long wound cavities. In general, I would say the 7 PRC will make a wider wound than the 6.5 PRC and probably penetrate as deep or deeper, but the details matter a lot here, and it really depends on the bullets you're comparing. For instance, the 130 grain Terminal Ascent and 143 grain ELDX for the 6.5 PRC both made wider wounds than the 160 grain LRX, and the 127 grain LRX actually penetrated the deepest out of all 6 loads here. And for instance, with that apples to apples 143 versus 175 grain ELDX, penetration and the size of the wound cavity were almost identical for both loads. I do need to give my normal disclaimer here. Results in clear gel like this don't normally translate one-to-one into real-world situations on game. Bullets tend to penetrate better, but not make as large of a wound cavity in clear gel like this versus a real-life animal. Animals aren't completely homogeneous like this gel is either, so the results should be taken as a general trend. I'm not saying that if a bullet penetrates 30 inches in gel that it will penetrate exactly that far in real animals from every angle, regardless of what the bullet hits. I'm saying that if a bullet demonstrates wide, shallow penetration in gel, it'll probably produce a wide, shallow wound in an animal. Likewise, if bullet A penetrates better than bullet B in gel, well, it'll probably penetrate better than bullet B in an animal, all other things being equal. Same thing with the size of the wound cavity the bullet makes, etc. So take all that for what you will. These general trends I just described in ballistic gel tend to match up well with what I have experienced using this different ammunition on game. So I'll briefly talk about some of my experiences hunting with a couple different 6.5 and 7mm PRC loads before we move on. For instance, I shot a black buck with a 175 grain ELDX from the Hornady Precision Hunter line in early 2024. That animal dropped instantly at the shot. That was a strongly quartering 2 shot. The bullet punched through the shoulder muscle and the bone, the ribs, the entire chest cavity, exited in front of the other hip. That was a very close range, high velocity impact. Meat loss was substantial, but I took that shot specifically because I wanted to observe penetration from that bullet under those circumstances. It did not blow up like some people say that it will. I'm not saying that never happens. It didn't happen here, though. And like I said, it even exited. Damage to the vitals of that animal was horrific as well. Completely destroyed everything in the chest cavity. I shot a cow moose in Colorado in late 2024 using the 170 grain Terminal Ascent. That was about a 135-yard shot. As is common with moose, she stayed on her feet for a few seconds after the first shot, so I fired again. Both shots hit on the right shoulder, but at different angles. They made nearly a volleyball-sized wound to the right lung where both bullets hit initially, but the bullets exited the moose and left smaller but still sizable wounds in the left lung. One exited the front of the left lung, one out the rear of the left lung. The moose tipped over about 20 seconds after the first shot. She went less than 10 yards. I was pretty impressed with how those bullets performed. I used the 127 grain Barnes LRX on an Axis doe with my 6.5 PRC. 55-yard shot. The deer went about 50 yards after that shot, and I used that ammo and I took a slightly behind the shoulder shot straight through both lungs, specifically not to ruin a lot of meat. That ammunition made the smallest wound on that deer out of everything I have shot with any ammo from either of these cartridges. But it still worked. The bullet exited, it did cause significant damage to her lungs, and she didn't go that far. Like I said, only about 50 yards. I didn't have trouble finding her either. I have not used the 130 grain Terminal Ascent on an animal yet, but I have used a 140 grain North Fork Semi-Spitzer custom handload from Pendleton Ammunition. That bullet has a similar general construction to the Terminal Ascent, but it's not exactly the same. The North Fork bullet that I used here was also heavier overall and was going a little bit slower than the 130 Terminal Ascent. I shot a massive hog with that ammo, though. He went about 25 yards after the shot, and he actually died within sight. The load performed wonderfully in gel with massive expansion and incredible penetration. Same sort of performance on the hog. I took a quartering shot through both lungs. I hit the plumbing coming off the top of his heart, scrambled his lungs. Like I said, went less than 25 yards after the shot. Now, those are my experiences with hunting with the loads I just compared in gel. I haven't used that 160 grain LRX yet for the 7PRC. I have used a couple of other loads I didn't compare in the gel that I'll talk about now, in addition to that North Fork load I just discussed. First, I took Hornady Outfitter ammo with the 160 grain CX bullets to Africa in 2023. I shot Impala and Blue Wildebeest with them. The shots were all at relatively short range. That's why I selected the CX bullet to begin with. Performance was excellent. All the bullets exited. That Impala went 25 to 30 yards after the shot. It literally blew part of his lung out of his body afterwards. That Blue Wildebeest dropped instantly. I also shot a mule deer with that same ammo later in 2023. That was about a 330-yard shot. The deer dropped instantly there too. I shot a very nice axis deer in the spring of 2024 after the black buck with a 175 grain Accubon long range from Nosler. That was a high shoulder shot. Range was about 160 yards. That buck dropped instantly. The bullet wrecked his vitals too. That bullet also exited despite hitting the shoulder blade plus ribs going in and out. I also shot a feral hog with Federal's new 175 grain tipped fusion load in the spring of 2025. Range was about 35 yards in thick timber. I was hunting with a Pulsar Thermion 2 thermal on my Bergara Sierra early in the morning before the sun came up. That hog was acting suspicious. He looked like he was about to leave. His body was behind a big tree with just his head sticking out, so I shot him just behind the ear, dropped instantly. It left about a nickel-sized exit wound on the other side of his neck. I shot him again in the chest on the ground for insurance and to further test bullet performance. That bullet punched a hole just smaller than my fist in the near side of his rib cage, turned his lungs to jello. Bullet exited the offside. I weighed him afterwards. That hog weighed about 195 pounds on the hoof. So big, but not gigantic animal. For reference, that hog I shot with a 6.5 PRC North Fork load weighed 260 pounds on the hoof. All in all, I've been very impressed and very happy with the performance of all the ammo I've used for both cartridges on game. No bad experiences with any of them. I actually haven't recovered a bullet from any of these loads in either cartridge from any animal either, not even the moose. All right, now let's talk about recoil. Now, the 6.5 PRC comes out way on top in the recoil department when comparing the ELDX loads for each cartridge. I pulled bullets from a couple loaded cartridges from the Hornady Precision Hunter factory loads for both rounds, weighed the powder contained in each one, used all that to calculate recoil out of an 8-pound rifle. The 7PRC has about 45% more free recoil energy than the 6.5 PRC. That more or less matches up with my experiences shooting both of them. Now, I think the 7PRC is a shootable cartridge, but the 6.5 PRC recoils a lot less. Everybody, no matter how tough you are, shoots better with a lower recoiling rifle. That is especially true for people that are physically smaller and more recoil shy, and if you are hunting with a very lightweight rifle. We'll talk more about this in a second. What about accuracy? Like I mentioned earlier, Hornady implemented some design principles with both cartridges to help optimize accuracy. Check out Big Game Hunting Podcast episode 366, where John Snow and I talk about this in depth for more details. But long story short, cartridges with a long neck for adequate neck tension on long, high BC bullets that have a steep shoulder for head spacing, a fat case with minimal body taper, and a snug freebore diameter are all conducive to accuracy. The 6.5 and 7 PRC have all those characteristics. However, the lower recoil of the 6.5 PRC will likely translate into better accuracy afield on average for most people. I know this is the internet. Everybody shoots great all the time. Recoil doesn't bother them. But in the real world, with real people, there is a significant difference between 20 and 30 foot-pounds of recoil, which is about what it works out to for the 6.5 PRC and 7 PRC. All other things being equal, most people will just shoot more accurately with a rifle generating that much less recoil. Now let's talk about ammo availability. Both cartridges are pretty popular. Lots of ammo companies have picked them up in the last couple of years, but the 6.5 has an edge here, probably because it's just been around longer. Midway USA lists 26 factory loads for the 7 PRC and 40 for the 6.5. Both are represented in many of the same ammo lines: Hornady Precision Hunter, Hornady Outfitter, Hornady Match, Barnes Vortex Long Range, Nosler Trophy Grade Long Range, Federal Terminal Ascent, Federal Tip Fusion, etc. Weatherby also makes ammo for both, same with Norma. Custom loads are available for both from Choice Ammo, Hendershots, Pendleton Ammo, and Copper Creek as well, among others. Of note, Winchester and Browning make 6.5 PRC ammo, but not 7 PRC ammo. Barnes also offers the 6.5 in their new Harvest collection line with a 145 grain tipped Game King, but there are no 7 PRC loads there right now. Furthermore, the 6.5 PRC is currently available in some lower price tier ammo lines. The 7 PRC is not offered in, like the Norma Whitetail and Federal Classic Fusion. Those are not high-performing loads. They use a very simple, low BC bullet, but they will work just fine for deer and the like at closer range if you want to use some less expensive ammo in your sheep rifle or your elk rifle for deer hunting, for instance. Finally, even in cases where both are offered in the same ammo line, the 7 PRC is, on average, more expensive to feed than the 6.5 PRC. For instance, on Midway, the cheapest 7 PRC stuff is the Hornady loads. They all go for over $50 a box. There are 8 6.5 PRC loads on Midway available for less than $50 a box right now. And the Hornady Precision Hunter ammo, for instance, is $3 a box less expensive for the 6.5 PRC. Now, I have not shot every 7 PRC factory load yet, but I've shot the majority of them. Like I mentioned earlier, current production ammo is almost universally slower than advertised. Hornady has caught a lot of flack for this, but they're not the only one guilty of publishing, let's just say, optimistic muzzle velocities. The Federal Premium, ELDX, and Terminal Ascent loads are almost dead on with their advertised velocities, but their tipped fusion is a little slow. Same with the Nosler ammo I've shot with the 175 ABLR, same with the Barnes ammo, and the Weatherby ammo with the 177 grain hammer bullet, all 1 to 200 feet per second slower than advertised. On the other hand, 6.5 PRC ammo seems to be delivering velocities much closer to advertised right now. Every single load I have shot out of my Bergara Premier Divide rifle with a 24-inch long barrel was almost exactly dead on in the velocity department. Speaking of rifles, the rifle situation with these two cartridges is very similar to the ammo situation. For instance, Sportsman's Warehouse lists 131 6.5 PRC rifles on their website and 70 7 PRC rifles. Hornady did a great job of getting rifle companies to pick up both cartridges, but there are more 6.5 PRC rifle options out there. For instance, you can get rifles from Bergara, Browning, CVA, Christensen Arms, Fierce Firearms, GA Precision, Gunworks, Hill Country Rifles, Mossberg, Proof Research, Remington, Ruger, Savage Arms, Seekins Precision, Springfield Armory, and Weatherby in both cartridges. Now, I have heard Tikka makes 7 PRC rifles. I have not seen any yet, but they definitely make rifles in 6.5 PRC and have been doing so for a while. Now, I have a Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT and a Bergara Sierra, both in 7 PRC. Both are actually left-handed rifles, too. Both companies make left-handed models for those rifles in 6.5 PRC as well. Ruger makes a left-handed Hawkeye FTW Hunter in 6.5 PRC. I have that exact rifle just in 300 Win Mag, but they don't make any left-handed 7 PRCs at this instant. Savage also makes left-handed rifles in both chamberings. Now, most notably, Winchester does not currently make 7 PRC rifles. They do make their XPR and Model 70 in 6.5 PRC, though. Drilling down a little deeper, some rifles are virtually the same in both chamberings, but it is more common to find smaller and lighter rifles in 6.5 PRC. That's not to say you can't find lightweight rifles in 7 PRC, because you can. For instance, the Bergara Crest Carbon is available in both rounds. They list 6.5 pounds for their Crest Carbon in 7 PRC. That's stripped, no sling, no loaded magazine, no scope. 6.2 pounds for that exact rifle in 6.5 PRC. 22-inch long barrel for the 7 PRC, 20-inch long barrel for the 6.5 PRC. So that's an example where you can get a pretty lightweight rifle in both. But as another example, the Bergara MG Microlight is an ultra lightweight short-barreled rifle with a folding stock, just 5.9 pounds slick. That rifle is available in 6.5, but not 7 PRC. That rifle has an 18-inch long barrel, and you're going to lose probably quite a bit of velocity with a barrel that short, but you're also probably still getting performance a little bit better than a 6.5 Creedmoor would in a 24-inch long barrel out of a barrel 6 inches shorter. Furthermore, the 6.5 PRC recoils so much less than the 7 PRC that you can go down to a significantly lighter rifle and still have less recoil. For instance, the 6.5 PRC with that 143 grain ELDX I mentioned earlier in my recoil calculations will generate 23 foot-pounds of recoil energy in a 7-pound rifle. The 7 PRC will have 25.4 pounds of recoil in a 9.5-pound rifle. So still a little bit less recoil in a rifle 2.5 pounds lighter. Okay, so with all that said, which cartridge is right for you? There is certainly a lot of overlap in the best use cases for each cartridge, but I think the 7 PRC is best used as an all-purpose cartridge for anything this side of Cape Buffalo. Likewise, I think the 6.5 PRC is perhaps the ultimate short-action cartridge. It is great for use in a hunt in rough country where you want a lightweight rifle that still performs well at long range. Now, you could certainly use a 6.5 PRC as an all-purpose cartridge, right? There's nothing I would hunt with a 7 PRC I wouldn't hunt with a 6.5. I'd hunt deer, antelope, black bear, African plains game, even elk and moose with both rounds when using appropriate ammunition. Same thing with sheep and mountain goat, but I think that is an area better for the 6.5, mainly due to the rifle situation. Nothing saying you couldn't also use a 7 PRC on a mountain hunt. I just think the 6.5 PRC is a little bit better suited for that task. Now, the 7 PRC does outperform the 6.5 on paper, but not by a tremendous amount, especially when you're comparing those slower 7 PRC rounds to the 6.5. And that extra performance for the 7 PRC comes at the cost of much more recoil. It's worth noting the 7 PRC does markedly better with copper bullets than the 6.5, so that is an important consideration for those who hunt in California or who just prefer lead-free ammo. The 6.5 is a better choice for use with a more recoil-shy hunter. With the right rifle, it's also great in a situation where you need a more compact rifle. Both are great for deer hunting, for instance, but of these two cartridges, and yes, I am aware there are lots of others that fit the bill here too, I would go with a 6.5 PRC in a rifle with a shorter barrel for hunting deer out of a box blind, for instance. Furthermore, the 6.5 PRC has a better selection of factory ammo. You also have less expensive ammo. I have both. I like both. I feel like there is a place for both in most people's gun safe. But what if you could only choose one? A lot of this comes down to personal preference and the sort of hunting you are doing. If you prioritize a lighter rifle and/or a cartridge that recoils less, go with the 6.5 PRC. Likewise, if you are doing more hunting for game like deer and antelope with perhaps an occasional elk, then also go with the 6.5 PRC. You can certainly hunt elk or moose with the 6.5, but for me personally, I would lean towards the 7 PRC for doing more hunting for bigger game, elk, moose, African plains game, etc. Likewise, if you are required to hunt with copper ammo or if you just prefer to use copper bullets, go with the 7mm PRC as well. There are very few situations where I'd say the 6.5 or 7 PRC is the wrong answer. Both will work great for a lot of the same stuff. But like I said, the answer here really just depends on your preferences, abilities, and specific hunting conditions. I lean more towards the 7 PRC myself, but I also wouldn't tell a guy with a 6.5 PRC they are undergunned either for pursuing stuff this side of Cape Buffalo. You are, of course, welcome to disagree with me here, but I'm just calling things like I see it. But what do you think of my assessment? Let me know in the comments. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now and hit that like button, the thumbs up button. I've also put links below the video to articles I have written about some of my favorite pieces of hunting gear like slings, ear protection, and scopes. And for more detailed information on popular hunting cartridges and what they are best suited for, click on the link in the video description or in the pinned comment, or go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/ebook. Sign up there to get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting calibers. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great day and good hunting.